excuse me for that. So tonight's program will feature 5 experts in the fields of energy and environment and provide a primer on BES technology and its role in the fight against climate change. I'm going to do a brief introduction on what the project in Medway is, and then I will introduce each of the speakers with a brief description of who they are and ask them to make a presentation. And each of the 5 speakers will make a presentation. If you have questions and want to address something that a speaker is doing, after all 5 speakers have made their presentation, we'll take those questions. What we ask is that you put those questions in the chat feature, and either I or Representative Murray will present those questions to the speakers. So we ask that you put the question in the chat function and try to be concise so that we can get to as many questions as possible. And let me begin by introducing briefly the panel, and I will provide, again, more information when I introduce each speaker. Tonight we have Dwayne Breger, the director of the UMass Clean Energy Extension; Elizabeth Turnbull Henry, the president of the Environmental League of Massachusetts; Coleen O'Brien, the general manager of the Reading Municipal Light Department; Matt Paiss, the technical advisor at battery materials and systems for the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory; and Kavita Ravi, the senior director at BlueWave Solar. Before we begin with the panel, I want to share with you what I know about the Medway proposal. And while tonight's discussion is not a site-specific presentation, it's important to put it in context. We'll hear tonight basic information about battery storage, what it is, and safety aspects of it. It's a background for future discussions, and I'm sure site-specific information will be provided when and if the proposal moves forward. So I'm going to get my screen up here. So the Medway grid project that's proposed, it's a battery energy storage facility that's going to connect to the Medway substation to serve the ISO transmission grid. And that facility will purchase electricity from the grid during non-peak times and store that excess energy in the batteries, and then make that stored energy available during peak consumption hours. Able Grid is the company that won a 250 megawatt capacity contract with ISO New England. And they're participating in the Massachusetts Clean Peak program, which provides incentives to get renewables produced and charge those batteries and discharge them at times that will help displace emissions from fossil fuel plants. The batteries will have 2 hours of discharging capacity. 250 megawatts times 5 hours is 500 megawatt hours. And the footprint that this facility is on is a 3 acres of a total of 9.26 acres, and the remainder of that land is going to remain as existing woodland. And it also includes an accessory infrastructure that enables electricity to come on and off the grid, which is a project substation. And I have some photographs and renderings of that equipment. So this is the location where the project is to be sited. You'll see the restaurant 45 and the junction of 126 and 109. The property is actually right where Chris's Auto and Truck Repair is located. And you can see down here the Exelon power plant and the Eversource facility down off of, I believe this is West Street in Medway. But this is the proposed project area. The next slide is zoomed in a little closer so you can get a bit of a closer up look at that parcel. And then I have it zoomed in with the rendering of where the project is over here on the right side of the screen and the location on the screen. So if you notice the existing The existing station is in this particular area on the overhead, and all of the battery storage pieces will be in this area of the parcel. This is 109 at the top, and you can see all of the batteries are laid out. They will be stacked at 2 levels, and let me show you what that looks like. This is the array of double stacked batteries. The substation is over to the left of the screen.
Excuse me, Jeff.
Excuse me, Jeff, we haven't.
You're not sharing your screen.
We haven't seen any of your slides yet. You gotta
Okay.
share your, yeah, you gotta share all those slides. We
Okay,
didn't see
hold
it.
on.
I'm able to see them.
I can see him.
I
Okay,
can see them too.
Yeah, I can see him too.
I can see them.
okay, thank you.
I can see him.
Okay, so this is a closer up view of the battery storage facility. And this is what a particular container looks like. Behind these doors, the batteries are stored in that particular facility. And this is the substation that will be on the property as well. Just to give you some sense, and I know that Matt Paiss will talk about this in particular, but there are some very large projects already out there in the world, and California has 2 of the largest facilities that are up and running already today. And it's 300 megawatts and 1,200 megawatts. Ours is the world's largest battery storage facility. I believe that's 30 minutes from Matt Pace's home. So our first speaker that's up tonight is Dwayne Breger. As I indicated, he's the director of the UMass Clean Energy Extension, and he's been at UMass since that center since 2015. He's also been a director of Renewable Energy Division at the Mass Department of Energy Resources, and there he was responsible for the state's renewable portfolio standard and the development of RPS solar carve-out and solar loan program, the advance of biomass energy policy, and he served on the staff working group that designed the regional greenhouse gas initiative. I had the pleasure of serving on the battery energy storage task force, and Dwayne was one of the principal authors of a report in 2019 that was looking at battery energy storage, and also was a lead presenter in a symposium that was done on this topic in December of 2020. So I will stop sharing my screen at this point and turn the presentation over to Dwayne.
Great. Hi, everybody, and thank you, Representative Roy. Thanks for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. My task to start off is really to talk about energy storage and clean energy transition at a very high level, and where Massachusetts is at to really set the stage for the remaining speakers. So as part of our Commonwealth's transition to clean energy, the role of energy storage is central to our ability to deliver reliable and affordable electricity services to homes and businesses. Unlike other commodities that we rely on, like food and water and oil and gas, electricity has really minimal storage capacity in its supply chain currently. Instead, our grid relies now on competitive bidding of base load, ramping, and peaking power generators, and a centralized grid manager in NISO New England to assure that electricity demand and supply are balanced in near real time all the time. Moving to renewable energy with substantial contributions from reliable and predictable but intermittent resources, particularly solar and offshore wind. The importance of energy storage is well recognized, and the state has been moving with policies and programs to engage this technology and prepare business cases for storage ownership and control strategies that can succeed in the marketplace. The Massachusetts Energy Storage Initiative provides an umbrella for these efforts with the objectives of attracting, supporting, and promoting storage companies in Massachusetts, accelerating the development of early commercial storage technologies, and expanding markets for storage technologies by creating economic value of storage benefits to clean energy integration, grid reliability, and for customer affordability. In the 2016 State of Charge report, commissioned by DOER and the Mass Clean Energy Center, analysts concluded that at least about 1,760 megawatts of energy storage would be most beneficial for Massachusetts and provide net positive benefits. With further expansion of electrification in our heating sector, and since the 2016 report, even more expanded goals for renewable generation, I suspect this number is even higher now. To accelerate the energy storage market in Massachusetts, DOER and Mass CEC moved forward with a set of demonstration projects referred to as the ACES projects, the Accelerated Commonwealth Energy Storage Program, promulgated or established requirements to include energy storage with solar projects in the SMART solar program, and promulgated the Clean Energy Standard. The Clean Peak Standard. In 2018, the legislature and the governor passed the act to advance clean energy, and set a 1,000 megawatt hour target for storage implementation by 2025. As of February this year, the utilities have reported to DOER that 179 megawatt hours have been installed, and that there is 874 megawatt hours of storage in the development pipeline. So there is clear evidence that energy storage is really making progress in Massachusetts, as evidenced by this project that we're talking about tonight in Medway. The energy transition to clean energy is not without environmental and community tensions. We are seeing this in the work that we do at the Clean Energy Extension at UMass. We're seeing this particularly in solar development with tensions between solar siting, land use, and community decision-making. So it's exciting to hear about the Medway project, which represents a potential substantial shift in the scale of battery energy storage development and investment in Massachusetts. But as such, it deserves careful study, scrutiny, and community input to the process. So I'm happy to be part of this panel, and thank you again, Representative Roy, to invite me and to begin these important conversations with the community.
Great, thank you so much. And if people wanted to get more information on your work at the extension and a copy of the report, is that something that you could throw into the chat so that they could get a link to that?
Appreciate that, and a shout out also to you, Representative, for your support on that and your contributions to the steering committee. So yes, absolutely. Just give me 30 seconds, and I'll get those web links in the chat.
Great, I appreciate it. For folks who are listening, I was kind of a potted plant during those discussions because it was a bunch of scientists and engineers talking in a different language, but I appreciated the ability to participate and see firsthand what folks were doing in this space. So I'm going to share my screen again to introduce our next speaker. And Elizabeth Turnbull Henry she took the lead of the Environmental League of Massachusetts in 2017, and she's committed to making Massachusetts lead the nation environmental policy and getting on a pathway to net zero emissions. I've had the pleasure of getting to know her very well in my new role with the committee and see her leadership in action. She's previously directed climate and energy programs for Adidas and has consulted to the United States Department of Energy, worked as a sustainability lead for a Massachusetts-based residential construction firm, and led international travel programs to over 30 countries. And an interesting thing, because I just got my recent issue of Boston Magazine, but I see in April 2021, Elizabeth was named number 34 on Boston Magazine's list of 100 most influential Bostonians. I'll have to check and see if she made the, oh, maybe that is for this issue. I haven't seen it, but you can answer that when you get up. She has an MBA and Masters of Environmental Management from Yale University and a bachelor's in environmental science, policy, and economics from Colby College. And I now turn it over to Elizabeth Turnbull Henry. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Chairman. It was this year. My mom is thrilled. I was really pleased by the recognition. You know, you brought me here, Chairman, to ask me to share some of the sort of big picture decarbonization, like where Massachusetts is headed in the next 30 years and where energy storage projects like this fit in. So I am the president of ELM. We are a 122-year-old environmental advocacy organization. We're based on Beacon Hill. And we tackle a broad range of issues, but climate and equity really is at the heart of our agenda. I'm going to drop a link to our website here in the chat in case you'd like to learn more. You know, on a personal note, I guess I'm really pleased that this discussion is happening. And as I was preparing for this tonight, I was reflecting on how I'd feel about this proposal in my town and what questions I'd have. You know, I believe strongly that as we decarbonize the economy, transparent and inclusive processes must be at the backbone of infrastructure siting. And so it's a real credit to the organizers here tonight that this is happening. Sessions like this are really important. In my experience, battery energy storage systems are generally safe with proper engineering and emergency management protocols, but all energy infrastructure carries some degree of risk. And I think that some of my other panelist colleagues are prepared to talk more about the risks and mitigation. I'm happy to share more of my experience in the Q&A if that's appropriate, but I did want to pivot to really kind of the big picture context. In Massachusetts, all climate and energy policy now is made through the frame of a law called the Global Warming Solutions Act that was passed in 2008. And without getting too technical, this is our legally binding emissions reduction target. The law says that by 2050, Massachusetts must be net zero in emissions. It means we must have eliminated 85% of our climate pollution and found ways to offset or sequester the remaining 15. It is a big job. We have 29 years to do it. But the Baker administration, the state legislature, advocates and policymakers alike all agree that it's actually doable. And in fact, it could grow our state economy pretty significantly. I could talk about that for a long time, but one fact that I think is sort of interesting is that right now, Massachusetts, you know, everyone that buys energy in Massachusetts, we spend together about $28 billion a year, and about $18 billion leaves the state, and it goes to buy oil, fracked gas, a little bit of coal, some hydro from Canada, but the more renewable energy we make here, the more we are reinvesting in Massachusetts. And so most analysts agree that by 2050, at least half of our energy budget is going to be reinvested here in Massachusetts. And that's because by 2050, we will have stopped burning almost all fossil fuels, and more than 80% of the grid will be powered by renewables. More than half of that coming from offshore wind. About 1 in every 2 electrons we think is going to come from offshore wind. Second largest source of renewables is expected to be solar, with hydro in third place. I'm going to share a picture now, a chart that I find helpful. I just have one, but sometimes a picture is it's 1,000 words here. So the Brattle Group, which is a sort of a policy economic shop, did a really interesting study looking at the pathways for decarbonizing the New England grid. And you can see here in the first chart, the economy-wide greenhouse gas emissions are projected to drop pretty precipitously across all sectors: the electricity sector, transportation, buildings like your home and your office, industrial. In the second chart, you see that our power load is projected to about double by 2050, and that's because by 2050, most people will be driving electric vehicles. Most building thermal loads will be accommodated by things like heat pumps. not by heating oil. You can see in the third chart that the supply mix is really going to be changing too. Coal basically goes away. Natural gas becomes just a trickle. Hydro slowly grows. Wind grows a lot, as does solar. And then you see this wedge for storage. And this is because, you know, as we heard from Dwayne, these renewable resources are variable. They're predictably variable. We can look at the weather forecast. We can look at what happened last year, but they're predictably variable, and you need storage assets to accommodate the power when the wind is blowing fiercely, and feed it back into the grid during a lull. So stop sharing here. And the natural variability of these resources can be managed in basically two ways. One is with storage, energy storage systems like we talked about, a whole lot of interesting technologies, all of which are going to have some sort of a role to play in our clean energy transition. You've probably heard about like pumped hydropower, where you just, when power is cheap, you use it to pump water up the hill, and when it's expensive, you run it back down again into a generator. People are talking about making green hydrogen out of surplus renewable energy, making ice at night and using it to cool buildings on summer days during the day when power is more expensive. But you're also seeing, I think, a real growth and kind of proliferation in battery banks like this, and that's because they're relatively cost effective, scalable, and relatively proven. The second way of managing the natural variability of renewables is to be more flexible with when we use power. And again, I'm happy to talk more about this in the Q&A if that's of interest, but I'm certainly interested to see, and many of these proposals are crossing Chairman Roy's desk right now, ways of changing our grid so that we can be using power when it is cheap and abundant. Imagine pushing a button on your clothes dryer that said, dry my clothes when power is cheapest, rather than right away. And same for car charging and so on. No one knows for sure how much energy storage we're going to need by 2050. But it will depend on technology advancements and policy changes and so forth. But the Breger group, who made that slide that you just saw, estimates that across the 6 New England states, the ISO New England region, we're going to need somewhere between 13 and 48 gigawatts of storage across those 6 states by 2050. So for those that don't speak in gigawatts, to kind of put that in perspective, your facility is 250 megawatts. And so that means New England may need the equivalent of between 50 and 200 times the storage that's embodied or represented in the facility that we're talking about here. So I think community groups across New England are having conversations exactly like this, and I'm really pleased to be part of this tonight. So with that, I'll turn it to our next panelist.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And I apologize, I didn't realize it was April 2021, and that's the month we are. So congratulations, that's a tremendous honor, and well-deserved, because I know you are absolutely committed to the environment and committed to getting us to net zero. And I really appreciate your passion on the subject. So I'm going to share my screen again and introduce to you at this time Coleen O'Brien. Coleen O'Brien is the general manager of the Reading Municipal Light Plant. I had the pleasure of joining the TUE committee and traveling up to North Reading to see their battery energy storage facility in action. And Coleen has been the general manager at that plant since 2013. And prior to that, she was the utility director at Danvers Municipal Electric, where she served since 1995. And her power plant that she serves now encompasses 4 towns: Reading, North Reading, Wilmington, and Linfield Center. And she's got 35 plus years in the electric utility industry. And I think you'll see from her remarks tonight that she has a depth of experience. And what's incredible is, Dwayne, you heard him talk about ACES grants to power facilities, and Coleen and the Reading Municipal Light Department were recipients of a grant to put in a 5 megawatt battery storage project through one of those grants. And she's going to tell us about how that facility works and some of the the uses of it and how she has overseen safety at that particular facility. And I'll turn it over at this point to Coleen O'Brien.
Can you see that? Am I sharing? Okay, great. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about a very small battery compared to the gigawatts that we need. But this will just, this is part of a ACES grant, as the chairman has spoke of. And I'm just going to walk through this a little bit about maybe on a small scale compared to Medway. So this is a 5 megawatt battery. It's a behind the fence, which is a little bit different than something greater than 5 megawatts that would be bid into the ISO New England. We essentially use this as load shifting, and that means that we get economic with coincident ISO New England for capacity and transmission, peak shaving, reliability, and resiliency. And go to the next slide. We were awarded the grant in 2018. It was $1 million. Now, there was a couple of different grants that were given out. For example, Taunton Municipal Light owns theirs, and we took the pilot of leasing it. So we took the $1 million and we took off for the price for our consumers. And we could talk a little bit about the risk on leasing versus owning in a little bit. But this 5 megawatt plant has 780 lithium ion modules in it only has 2 containers. They're Samsung type. It's a 20-year essentially energy storage agreement with NextEra Energy, which is a facility subsidiary of Florida Power and Light. They're an energy services group for them. And this became operational in June 1st of 2019. I just want to point out that we have saved, not including the grant, over $346,000 in the first 19 months with this peak coincident management effort. And we estimate about 150,000 annual savings until the life of the plant. This battery storage is located in North Reading. The closest resident is about 1,000 feet away. We had to do a whole series of permitting, including sound for decibels. There wasn't any issues. We've gotten no complaints from any of the customers at all. Battery storage is a very quiet neighbor. I just want to talk a little bit about the fire suppression and the safety. So one of the things that happened with the aftermath of the Arizona thermal runaway issue that occurred was there was a report that was issued, and NextEra Energy was very proactive to come in and do some upgrades. When they did that, they added a new fire protection system, which was in addition to the FM200 dry chemical suppression system. They also included all kinds of new monitoring that's tied into their SCADA system for automation. And as you can see from the containers, there's no walk-in, everything is outside. So those stanchion pipes there are new, because what we learned in that report is that the one way of trying to handle any type of thermal runaway is dousing it with water. So those piping systems below the enunciators that you see, the fire department would come in and fill those pipes up with the cabinets closed. Now, NextEra, as I would imagine any battery owner, will put life before asset. And that's how that works. So they would flood out the panels and just make sure that everyone was to stay safe. Now, the interesting thing about the ventilation system and how this works is they're basically testing for hydrogen gas. And if the hydrogen gas starts to, if the monitors start to catch it, it could open the ventilation system. The problem with the ventilation system is it will bring moisture in that can actually destroy all the modules. So they have to put it on an automated system in order to control that, so that a false alarm wouldn't end up destroying all of the modules. I think another important part of this whole thing, we've done the first responder walkthrough and testing with the fire department, We have follow-up training with fire departments and all the mutual aid fire departments at the end of this month as well. But the National Fire Protection Agency has done a very good job in 855 in working on that whole section that has to do with these storage systems. And we look for those to start those regulations and things of towns that get these battery systems, adopting those and moving forward to ensure continued safeties on these systems. Go to the next one. This is just to show you some peak management focus and time shifting. I mean, we store off peak, and then during the peak we release it, and we save annually on the 1 hour of capacity. And each month there is a transmission peak as well with National Grid and Eversource. We're really excited about when we use our batteries and all of the other smart grid systems that we have in Reading. We have community solar, we have electrification rebates. And what's good about these types of peak shavings that we do and using the community solar is anytime we shave the peak, or we call it shred the peak with the kids during our third class training, is less carbon friendly peaker generations get turned on. And that's what we really try to focus on, as well as the economic benefits to our customers. The economics, as I said, the grant monies that we received from the ACES grant, I'd like to take a shout out to Bob Fitzpatrick from the CEC. I know he's online, and obviously Governor Baker and the legislature to thank them for that. We had some lessons learned on clarifying like the pilot or the tax treatments and things like that. Defining, like I said earlier, defining the technical, capital, and operational. Like, do you own it? Does someone else own it, like Nextera, and you dispatch it? You know, what does that look like? That's part of the reporting that we do to the DOER, so we can see what is the best model. And I said with the National Fire Protection System and all of the upgrades that are happening in those codes, I'm sure that the safety will continue. I'm just going to see if we can play this real quick. This is kind of a cute little. And that's it, neat as a pen. And not as many cabinets as Medway, but maybe more of a small scale. But thank you.
Thank you very much, Coleen. Great job. Did it really take a minute to build that whole thing?
That was it. That was real time.
That's incredible. We'll have to get that contractor online. That's just, those people work real fast. Well, you made a great segue into our next speaker. And let me share my screen again. Matt Paiss comes all the way to us from sunny California. He did remind me a little earlier that it's bright and sunny, and I told him that it's dreary and rainy out here in Massachusetts. But Matt Paiss is a technical advisor in the Battery Materials and Systems Group at PNNL, and prior to that, he was the president of Energy Response Solutions. He brings 28 years of energy response experience and he's retired as a fire captain with the San Jose, California Fire Department. His background in renewable energy started in 1982 at ARCO, and he's worked in the industry for several years, 10 years experience on the Renewable Energy Codes and Standards Committees, and currently represents PNNL on NFPA, that's the National Fire Protection Agency. 855 is the code that Coleen was talking about. And he's an expert in fire protection and safety of these systems. And I'm going to turn it over to Matt at this time and ask him to talk about the safety of these systems. And also, if he would fill us in on what's happening out at that the world's largest battery facility out there in California. So Matt, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Representative Roy, for the invitation. It's definitely an honor. We just got the invitation just a couple of days ago, so still trying to learn about the project, but I really appreciate the background that you've provided. Pacific Northwest National Labs is one of the 17 DOE-funded national labs. Our lab is located in Richland, Washington, and we employ approximately 4,500 of some of the top scientists in the world working on a variety of some of the biggest problems that we face. In the Energy and Environment Directorate that I work in, we have a real focus on developing the next generation battery materials. My role is I lead the energy storage safety codes and standards efforts. And what that means is I liken it to kind of a three-legged stool. On one side, I sit actually on codes and standards committees. So at the NFPA 855 is the standard for energy storage systems. UL 9540 is the product safety standard for energy storage systems. Those are a couple of the standards that I'll sit on and help draft common sense, hopefully, and enforceable codes that the users of the codes can understand. One of the other legs is the education outreach component of that. We can develop a code, but it's the interpretation of that code or standard that's really the key. So I do a lot of training, a lot of work with users of the code. That might be AHJs, those are authorities having jurisdiction. That could be a fire official, a building official, so that they understand what the intent is in some of that code, as well as with fire departments. It's really key that fire departments understand the challenges and the behaviors of different energy storage chemistries and technologies. And then the third leg of the stool is the feedback back to the lab. There might be a need for some more data to help inform those codes and standards to understand, what is a proper distance, for example, to separate batteries. And sometimes that requires some laboratory support in the form of research. So that's a bit about what I do. The emergence of large-scale energy storage plants is a fairly new phenomenon in the last couple of years. We just saw from Coleen, a very proud project on their part that is significantly smaller in size to this next one that's being undertaken in the state. And that's common around the country. I've been monitoring some of the chat, and there's been some, questions about, the size of some of these systems and, the experience level required. And what I'll say about that is this is territory that's new for the entire world. There's very few installations in the hundreds of megawatt size. It was just a couple of years ago that the largest system in the world at 100 megawatts was in Australia. And so now today, 30 minutes directly in front of me is a 300 megawatt system, 1.2 gigawatt hours of energy. On that same property is another 182 megawatt installation. And being built right now on that same property, which is owned by our utility, PG&E, is another 100 megawatts of batteries. So this one site, just 30 minutes from me, I'd say in the next 8 months is going to have upwards of 2.5 gigawatt hours of energy storage. So those contractors that are building those projects are learning every day. There is not really a playbook for how to build these massive systems. A lot of them are one-off engineering. So the best practices are really to try and design to the latest codes and standards. And so, for example, there is a different adoption cycle for fire codes and building codes across the US. Not every state adopts the most current code. And so as a technical committee member myself, we work on the best language that we know to address the problems in the built environment. And that code might not be adopted by a particular state for 4 to 6 years. And that's really the challenge. So when I was invited to come speak to this group about your concerns, which I think that your opportunity here to talk at this level is an excellent opportunity. I'm glad the community is asking these questions and putting this group together. It's a valuable resource. But as I looked into this project, one of the things I wanted to know was what year or what edition of the fire code was in place. And I reached out to a couple of experts in the state, fire training director. The NFPA 855 is very likely going to be adopted in the state by the time this project would actually, be approved, be permitted. And so that should give you some comfort to know that at least the system will be expected to be designed to, operated at the best known levels of codes and standards that we have today. I think there's probably a lot of questions people have, but I just wanted to address that there is a real focus at the Department of Energy's level that funds us. The Office of Electricity is what funds my work on safety. I have a colleague that is also joining today, Rebecca O'Neill, who has a real interest in this just from a potential case study example of a community that could potentially be replacing I think it's an oil-fired peaker plant with this project. That's a huge opportunity for a community to get some real, noisy and dirty energy off the grid and replaced with a much cleaner product. In closing, one of the things I would like to say is to the people that are concerned about safety and fire risk, let me just say this. When you look at an energy storage system, let's look at a cabinet. We saw a couple of pictures from Coleen's project. Each one of those cabinets was about 2.5 megawatts. And some people might say a system that is 100 times larger than that represents a significantly higher fire risk. The important thing to understand is that failures in batteries do not happen in every container at the same time. If you have a failure of a component, it's typically one component. And the goal in fire protection is to contain that failure to its fire area. So when it comes to the design and the positioning, the protections, just because you might have hundreds or thousands of containers doesn't mean that all of that energy is at risk. And then the other aspect of it is the fire department response. Very often these systems are behind the fence, utility owned, and very few fire departments will risk a life to save property and equipment that's already lost. So the trending best practice in emergency responder training is for especially these utility systems that are not in occupied buildings, is to consider letting them burn. The application of water represents additional challenges on runoff containment issues or sensitive areas. To the gentleman that asked a question about how close the Moss Landing power plant is to homes, what I will say is it is across the street from one of the most sensitive marine environments in the world, a Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary. So you cannot get any closer to sensitive environmental impacts. So there's a lot that can be done to ensure a safe design and the awareness of people that might respond to service it, or if there were an emergency there. So with that, I'll turn it back over to the chairman. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Matt. And I'm sure that there'll be some questions for you as we get closer to that. And I'm urging folks, if you have questions, please place them in the chat, and Representative Murray and I will ask those questions. And as I'm preparing for the next speaker, I'm going to ask Rep Murray to queue up the first question. If you'll go to the chat and queue up the first question, and I will take this opportunity right now to introduce our last speaker. Let me share my screen here for the last time. And I'm excited to introduce Dr. Kavita Ravi. She's a Senior Director of Utility and Technical Services at BlueWave Solar. And she's responsible for interconnection and energy storage in BlueWave Solar Plus storage products. She has worked also at the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, Mass CEC. That's the group that takes care of the ACES grants that we talked about earlier in the program. And very interesting, and I would urge folks to take a peek at this, but in 2016, she co-led the State of Charge report that explored market opportunities and barriers for energy storage in Massachusetts. So she brings both government experience, she brings industry experience, and a tremendous background in energy and energy storage. And with that, I will turn it over to Kavita, who actually also served on the battery storage task force, and I had the pleasure of serving with her as well. So with that, Dr. Kavita Ravi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rep. Roy. I appreciate the opportunity to speak here. I'll just say to everyone, typically I look better, but I was working late and had to cook dinner before the webinar. So you have my soccer mom face rather than my professional face. I hope you will forgive me for that. So it's actually a great advantage to go last because it gives you the opportunity to throw away your entire presentation and actually try to address perhaps what has not been covered by my illustrious colleagues who have spoken here. Before I get started on the content, I do want to claim with great joy that yes, I did co-lead the State of Charge report, but more importantly, the ACES Awards, the 26 projects worth $20 million. This is how I looked when I read over the 1,000 pages of applications. It was a lot of work and a lot of sifting through those projects. You know, they're like my pride and joy, like they're by my children. It is so great to see that video from Reading, because that was a project that was given to a municipal, that was sort of, we awarded projects for the different benefits that they brought, but that benefit was saving the municipal light plant money on their transmission charges by allowing them to lower their peak load with that battery technology. So hi, Coleen, and please say hi to Tom Alila. And so that was great. It was super great. Hi, Fitzy. I miss everyone at Mass CC. All right, I'll get started now. I'll try to share my screen. And I'm going to provide a couple of viewpoints. One from a developer viewpoint, which is what AbleGrid is, but also from my previous viewpoint, being having been at the Mass CEC. But I just want to start by saying these are all my personal thoughts, so you shouldn't consider me representing anyone. So I'll share my screen now and just want to make sure first I would like to share this, and then I'd like to go back to Chair Roy's presentation. So do you see a little pop quiz that just give me a thumbs up if you see it? A
Yes,
pop
indeed.
quiz.
We see
Thank
it.
you. Yeah, thank you. So this was a presentation that I created for a different audience, but just to show what the different storage technologies look like, right? These are electromechanical, electrochemical, which is like batteries. Then there's mechanical flywheels, molten salts, hydrogen, and pumped hydro. So no points for guessing which is pumped hydro. That has a huge environmental impact, and that's one of those plants is in Northfield, but when constructed correctly, it can provide, and when you mitigate all the environment impacts, you can get a huge value to the grid. It avoids the peaker plants like the ones in Medway, like in the middle of your community, as well as provides reliability for the grid, doesn't burn out your refrigerators and cause brownouts and so on. But you see, like batteries look no different from any other kind of storage facilities. Typically, these are in shipping containers of standard size. That's done for cost reasons. And then they are placed, next to each other. And then just going back to Matt's point about safety and how they're engineered, there's this new NFPA 855 standard that was published in, I believe, in late 2019, was still in development while I was at Mass CSC, which requires a variety of things in terms of spacing so that the batteries, the cells don't set fire to each other. It allows for airflow so that they don't overheat, all being close to each other. And then they require a variety of mitigation solutions if fire breaks out so it doesn't spread, etc. So fire departments of towns should be encouraged to look at that particular standard to see, what they can adopt, and then how they can, try to make their system safe. So now I want to go back to what Representative Roy shared earlier. Do you see that screen now, that presentation? You can give me a thumbs up if that comes on.
I see your screen on here. Do you want me to put my presentation back up?
No, I have your presentation up. So do you see?
Oh,
yeah.
no.
Do you see both my?
No, we're seeing just your original pop
Okay.
quiz.
Okay, so let me try to share this again.
Are we going to be graded?
I was grading those people that I administered the pop quiz on.
Okay.
Do you now see your presentation?
Now we see it.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So I just want to point out that this power plant, the peaker plant in the Exelon peaker plant in Medway, that is also used to shave, like, a peaker plant comes on a hot day in August when it's very hot and you need all the power you can get to turn on all the ACs, the air conditioners. And that's when this comes on. It's typically oil-based and it has a lot of emissions, right? So just to go back to Elizabeth's point, that when we are considering the climate and the environmental impacts and the changing nature of our energy sources, what we expect in the coming years is for oil-based peaker plants to be phased away and these battery systems to be in place of commensurate capacity, right? The benefits are that the emissions, whether it be CO2, but the NOx and the SOx, the harmful particulates are reduced. and then, but while not compromising the safety aspects of the battery, as Matt referred to, which is why folks have been hard at work in the past few years to take into account the safety aspects of these systems, how, what the risks are and how they can be addressed, whether it be thermal risks or chemical risks and so on. So I just wanted to touch upon that topic because I saw some questions come by, and some of my own presentation was overlapping with some of my previous speakers. So I thought I would touch upon things that hadn't been touched upon before. The other thing I want to mention is while at Mass CEC, one of the ACEs, or actually there were two ACEs projects that were meant to go, that were awarded to, one of which was awarded to Encore for testing out a new battery technology, which would allow the demonstration of the ability for the casino to not lose power even when the grid went down. And that could be later useful in hospitals and other critical care facilities. The other award was made to the Boston Medical Center, which is a hospital in downtown Boston. And in both those cases, I worked with the fire department because they had this concern that they didn't want the battery atop buildings. And we successfully worked with the fire department and the installers, the developers, to actually move these batteries to the ground, to a safe place on the ground. So it is possible to work with the town as both, and I say this both as a developer, but also on behalf of the friends that I made in these two different fire departments, to work with the developer to create safe safety, to accommodate safety considerations for the system and successfully address both the developer's desires as well as the safety concerns of the fire department. And I would say, like, working with the Boston Fire Department, as well as talking to the chief at the Everett Fire Department, was a very productive exercise, right? And then just addressing proximity concerns, I would say that, as Coleen pointed out, the noise considerations for these systems are minimal, right? And then as long as the chemical aspects of it are safely addressed as part of the installation of the systems, that risk should be mitigated. And then, as per the NFPA standards, there are other thermal and fire risks that can be mitigated in a system that is conformant to those standards. So I would suggest, and I want to wrap it up here and just take more questions. And I do want to say that as a developer, we have now, multiple megawatts of smaller systems that we have installed in or are installing in a variety of communities around the state. And we take the approach of having a dialogue, making presentations as part of the Conservation Commission or Zoning Board or Planning Board meetings, talking through a variety of those concerns, and addressing any questions that the community might have, because we as developers do feel that we want to be and can be a part of this energy transition that addresses climate change and protects the environments for our children, grandchildren, and our communities for the future. So I'll stop here.
Okay, Dr. Ravi, thank you so much. And thank you to all of the panelists. You were absolutely fabulous and addressed a lot of the issues that have been raised to date. But we've got a very active audience. I believe we have 78 participants on the call tonight, which is tremendous that the community is coming out and wants to learn more about what's happening here. So I'm going to turn it over to Rep. Murray to queue up the first question. And panelists, feel free to chime in if it's your area of expertise or if you have any information. We'd love to hear from you. And as Rep. Murray is asking that question, I will queue up the next one. So thank you.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. And thank you for, like you say, assembling this excellent panel of very knowledgeable individuals about this very, very interesting topic. You know, if in fact we are, as a society, committed to renewable energy and net zero emissions by 2050, this battery energy storage issue is a huge component of that and very, very important. So I think it's very exciting for the town of Medway to really be on the cutting edge of examining this type of facility and seeing if it wants to really be part of the community, and if so, how that would look in the community. And towards that end, I think it's very, very important for folks in Medway to ask questions, because ultimately they're going to have to make a decision or a series of decisions. And the only way that they can make proper decisions is with good information. And I think it's also tremendously beneficial and fortuitous, perhaps, that you are the House Chair of the Telecommunications, Utilities, and Energy Committee. So you are in a unique position of being able to provide really state-of-the-art information for Medway residents, so that they'll be able to make the best decisions possible. So with that, looking at the chat questions, the first one, I guess, maybe that ship has sailed. Can we record this for those who cannot attend? I'm not sure, but I would say yes.
Several people have been recording, so
so
right
that you're
ahead.
that. But actually, the first question of significance is kind of a two-parter. It says the blueprint says 250 megawatts, 639 megawatt hours, which is about 2 hours, 40 minutes. How important is experience building large scale BESS when undertaking a project of this size, particularly with regards to safety, fire suppression, and criteria for triggering fire suppression? And I think it was already answered, but there was part of that is how far is the 300 megawatt system in California from residents?
So yeah, I had tried to answer that one. The site is a power plant, and while there are no homes very close, it is across the street from a national marine sanctuary and right next to a very sensitive waterway. So that's really was a significant driver for any discussion of any firefighting water applications. So the design took that into consideration with containment and very unique fire suppression designs.
There was a question asking, what is pricing carbon? Is that related to carbon taxes? Who wants to tackle that one for us? And Brian, you can queue up the next one.
Maybe I'll take that. And that's Elizabeth. Do you want to take it?
I mean, I think it's, sure, Kavita, we can maybe both take it, but I think, you know, right now, carbon pollution wreaks a huge toll on the planet and economies and people, and we don't pay any cost associated with those harms. And so when people talk about pricing carbon or putting a tax or a fee on carbon. They're talking about trying to mitigate some of those harms, and maybe, in this case, in the case of the mess in the legislation that Chairman Roy is thinking about for carbon pricing, it would be, putting a fee on carbon pollution and using those revenues to accelerate decarbonization technology. So yes, it is related to carbon taxes.
Yeah, I would just add that the carbon pricing can come in various different forms, tax being one, but there's other forms as well. I'd point to the RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which does in fact, currently we live under a cap and trade program for carbon for our power plants that does put a price on carbon, albeit probably too low of one. But nonetheless, in that case, every quarter, some hundreds of millions of dollars worth of allowances are auctioned off. This is for 12, 13 states in the Northeast. And the vast majority of those auction proceeds are recycled by the states at their discretion into energy efficiency and renewable energy activities.
Yeah, that's a voluntary effort on behalf by our states, by the states that participate in the RGGI program. So it doesn't quite count as tax.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, we'd like to move on to the next question. So as I'm looking at it, I know that this point was addressed by the panelists, but maybe expand on it a little bit. The video showed the 5 megawatt plant, and the Medway facility would be 50 times larger. I think really the question goes to the larger point of, is bigger, more riskier, just some of the effects that I think the community could look to expect from a much larger facility that was shown in the video.
Yeah, this is Matt from PNNL again. I touched on this earlier in my discussions that failures occur at one point. They don't occur simultaneously across multiple enclosures. So the failure of a battery really needs to be addressed as far as a fire protection system design or an emergency response design of addressing that one enclosure and protecting others. And so the size of the plant is not necessarily equal to greater risk. When it comes to plumes of any products of combustion, I would just remind people that one of the dirtiest and most toxic sources of smoke and fire is from a vehicle fire. And those occur regularly throughout our community. And so I think just the perspective of putting everything in its buckets, I think is very important to understand. There are very few energy storage incidents that result in fire. There are vehicle and structure fires every day. So, we see similar kind of pushback in electric vehicles. And, when you look at the miles driven per fire on electric vehicles, it's 10 times less than for internal combustion engine vehicle. So, the goal really is to reduce the dirty carbon offsets of electrical generation with the clean sources, and this will have a significant impact on that.
The next question, I know that there was another question about the distance from homes, but I think we've addressed that several times. So I'll move on to the next question. It says the 26 ACES pilot projects in Massachusetts total 32 megawatts combined. How many of these much larger facilities have been built across Massachusetts, and is Medway the first?
I think the answer is it might be one of the first, and the 32 megawatts that were awarded now almost 3 years ago, those were 3 years ago, and they were meant to be pilots for a variety of the Medway-like projects. So certainly they are not of the same scale, but I also want to say the state didn't have resources to award anything of this scale. And the thought then was that the state would, and it didn't even award funds in the entirety for or completely to support those projects. It only awarded a portion, and the projects themselves needed to bring in some money. But the thought was to get the market going, to have a few of these systems in place, to understand how they might work, different business models, and so that they would then trigger private investments, which, like the Able Grid project, to then go on its own momentum.
Okay, Rep. Murray, the next question.
Yeah, this one, again, was addressed a little bit during the panel discussions. Which state has had BESS planning and policy rules the longest? The idea would be for Medway to model their rules off of a proven set. And, you know, I know that this is, you know, a evolving and new technology with changes all of the time. But, you know, clearly, I think some folks in the community are looking for kind of a, you know, a package of, you know, what's been proven to work.
So I'd like to take that, if that's okay, Rep. Murray.
Sure.
Thank you. Yeah. So I would caution people against going with the oldest first, because this entire technology is somewhat new. You know, it's 8 to 10 years old at the most, right? I would say even with the ACES projects that were awarded 4 years ago, these were one of the first projects. And the reason I would caution against oldest first is because I went to a safety seminar at the Sandia National Labs in Santa Fe, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, as part of my storage work at Mass CEC. And I was actually shocked to hear that California, which had had a ton of energy storage, or more than most states, you know, it wasn't an absolute a ton of energy storage, but more than most states, had not considered a variety of safety considerations that other states later to the game had been considering, for instance, in Massachusetts and in New York, because their conditions were different. You know, they were outdoor, away from communities. So those were different. And the considerations in Hawaii, where they've had energy storage for a long time now, are also different, because there really the compelling forces are the economic forces, you know, of displacing fuel that they have to ship from the mainland that makes it very expensive. So I might suggest that the considerations should be sort of best practices that different states have done. New York City has put in a ton of resources towards developing some guidelines, some of which would be applicable to Medway and some not, because they're in an urban environment. Massachusetts itself has, you know, considered a variety of this. I would say looking to maybe the national labs or the state, the Mass CEC, for instance, looking to them for resources on permitting, which New York has developed some standards around, or some other safety pieces that Matt referred to, would be the way to go, rather than oldest and adopting those.
Thank you.
Matthew, we've got a question that seems to be directed to you, and it's indicating you had mentioned that you are setting standards for safety within BESS facilities. The question is your agency setting safety standards for the siting of facilities?
So PNNL does not set standards. Those are set by fire codes and product safety standards. And yeah, the NFPA 855, and as a result, the fire codes that point to it do have requirements for siting next to lot lines, other buildings. But it is not the hazard class that requires, hundreds of feet of distance. Typically, those siting requirements are 10 feet from a lot line or 10 feet from a building, which acknowledges the risk. These are subject matter experts that are on these technical committees that are making these decisions. So I'm seeing a number of questions that are concerned with much larger distances. And so in the codes, these can be placed, fairly close distances. In the instance where there is a need to provide a higher level of protection, there are methods and means in the fire code to provide additional barrier protections. So there's always options to provide additional protections for other sensitivities. For example, if you are on top of a delicate or high water level, you might have to have fire protection mitigation measures that take that into consideration. Either a contained basin or a decision that water's not going to be used, and that would affect the siting. So I hope that answers that question.
All right, Rep. Murray, you're on.
Yeah, so this is something that I don't think has been touched on. How much money would the operator of the proposed Medway facility expect to earn each year from operating the site? So I guess that goes to generation of revenue, and I'm sure that that's kind of a fluctuating figure and depending upon a lot of things, but are any of the panelists familiar with something under this area?
Yeah, I'm not sure that the panel is got enough site-specific information to answer a question like that. I may be wrong, but to the extent that that is a question out there that we can't get from the panel, I see who the question is from. I will get back with an answer like that. But I also see that Selectman Glenn Trindade is here, and put your hand up if you have an answer to that question. If you do, you got to unmute yourself.
So they won at the recent auction, and they did not hit a home run like Exelon did a few years ago. So I don't know what they're going to get, but they're going to get payments from ISO New England to help defray the cost of developing this facility for a period of 7 years. And then after that, they will get a set sum of money each year to just have the facility ready. So they're basically, in a lot of ways, sitting back, and their insurance that if there's a demand, like someone else said earlier, it gets really warm in the summer, it gets really cold in winter, that they are ready to supply that power to the grid. When they do, they then will also get additional payments for when they are supplying energy to the grid. So their income on this project is a combination of their first 7-year ISO payments, their ongoing payments after that, and then anytime they're supplying energy to the grid.
Thank you.
I'll just add one thing, Rep. Roy, that it's one of a few handful of projects, less than a handful of projects that are of its nature, because a lot of people haven't figured out how to make money with these systems. So if anyone's thinking that, this is all like that they're going to be flush, maybe, but not a lot of people have figured it out. So I think they might still be sort of like slim on the margin, and they might have to find other uses for this battery to actually make it pencil.
Thank you very much. What environment do the batteries require? Do they need to be kept at or below a certain temperature with certain airflow? And do they emit anything?
So they do need to be in a controlled environment. So typically there is a heating, ventilation, air conditioning units that are on every enclosure to maintain humidity and temperature. Typically they're around 70 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity typically below 60%. So that is a critical design feature of being a listed energy storage system. And that is for lithium ion. There are some other chemistries and technologies, but for this particular project, that's how those would be treated. And oh, I'm sorry, and there are no emissions. They do not emit any gases. Lead acid batteries can emit small amounts of hydrogen during charging and discharging. Lithium ion batteries do not have any gases that come off under normal operations.
Rep Murray, you're up.
Sure. And this is something that's been discussed, but certainly worthy of further discussion. What preventative measures are there to prevent a fire to begin with? Safety measures in place if there is a fire, for example, a built-in sprinkler system, and if there is a fire, what hazardous gas or materials will be potential exposure?
So I'll take that one again. A energy storage system consists of the battery cells grouped together and then a battery management system that is monitoring the temperature of the module, the voltages of the cells, the current, and that battery management system will essentially isolate that battery if any of those metrics are out of range. And so there are multiple levels of safety interlocks that can be tied into a smoke detector, a gas detector, temperature monitors. And so if any of those sensors detect an out of range condition, they'll open those interlocks and the modules will just be at a steady state. Still be charged, but they will no longer be charging or discharging. As far as the fire protection system that is designed in, today, typically systems will include a clean agent. And what that means is it's not water and it's not a dry chemical like your typical fire extinguisher in your home. It is a gaseous agent. And those are very common in data centers, wherever there's sensitive electronics. They're very effective for visible flame or fire from normal combustibles like a wire. But if the fire is as a result of the battery cell itself, then typically what's used is either water or letting it burn out. So the best practice right now would be to address explosion issue through an exhaust system. And so I was happy to hear that the system that we saw earlier, that they did include that in their design. Some of the incidents that have occurred around the world that result in explosions had no, we call it deflagration prevention. They had no systems to address the buildup of flammable gases. So as a safety expert, if I were involved in advising the design, that would be something that I would recommend that they address.
Thank you.
I see the next question has already been answered by Matt in the chat, so I'll move on to the next one. I've been disturbed to see the marketing materials make claims that batteries reduce demand. While they will reduce what is needed from the grid, they do not reduce the demand for electricity. I understand why they might enable green energy such as wind and solar. I do not see the Medway location being near any producers like that. And in fact, the Medway siting will reduce costs of the power plants and could arguably increase demand. Who would like to tackle that one?
I can take a little bit of that. I don't have all the full answer. So I think when the claim that batteries can reduce demand are a little bit they're pertinent to at least two different situations. One is like the one Coleen mentioned, when your entire municipal light plant is sort of is a whole entity under ISO New England, then the load that the municipal light plant bears is considered demand. And therefore, if you put a battery there, then it's offsetting that demand. Also, if you have the battery behind an industrial park or some large consumer, you can offset their demand. I think that might be where, like, some sense of that claim. But overall, batteries can help in a couple of different ways. What I didn't mention at the top of the hour is that my role is at BlueWave Solar is it's not that I had like an obscure role at the beginning, but now I have this role called Head of Grid Integration. So just from that perspective, what I can say is batteries can help the distribution grid in a variety of ways. They can help with what's called volt var and some reliability issues. So for sure, they can help your side of the grid of its fluctuations and variations. It can help displace dirty peaker plants like the ones that are in Medway, because if the power comes from a cleaner source, then the dirtier source in due course, depending on the rest of the grid, may phase out, right? And then what they can help do is provide resiliency for the grid, right? What happens is the grid is a big interconnected grid, and if some parts of the generation fall off, then the electricity reroutes itself through the existing parts of the grid, and having storage where you have it can be helpful in not outaging that larger area of the grid, right? So it can provide resilience. It can help with the forming up of the renewables, because solar is intermittent, so it can support the renewables. It doesn't have CO2 emissions, so it is by itself cleaner. So those are some aspects, I think, that can answer part of your question at least.
Great. Rep. Murray, do you have another one? Oh, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
and
Elizabeth,
again,
I'm sorry, I cut off Elizabeth. Go.
Oh yeah, no worries. I was reflecting on this question too, because I'm not sure if I'm hearing it right, but I have a graph that I was going to share that might help.
Please do. Absolutely.
All right. So one of the, there are a number of benefits from, largely electrifying our economy, transportation, and heating fuels. But one of those benefits is that we can, we can use the energy embodied in renewables, for example, sort of more efficiently than we can when we combust fossil fuels. And you see here in the graph on the left is how we're currently, the current sources and uses of electricity. And you can see that each bar sort of represents the volume of energy. And you can see that we're using a lot of petroleum and a lot of natural gas. But that, for example, the natural gas that we use to create electricity, there's a big drop off because even the most efficient power plant is only able to capture about a third of the energy embodied in natural gas. And so maybe what this question might be getting to the fact that storage can help us use the energy embodied in either fossil fuels or the energy contained in renewable sources more efficiently. And therefore you see here in 2050, and this data comes from the state of Massachusetts, you can see that this is how the state is imagining that we're going to be using renewables in the future, and the overall amount of energy that we are going to need, the number of tera BTUs is a lot less, and storage is part of what allows us to use those resources more efficiently.
Well, I'll say that answered the question. Thank you. Rep. Murray, you have another one?
yeah, so this has been discussed a few times tonight, but it's obviously a concern and it's certainly important. So I think it's worthy to be addressed further. So it was mentioned that if there is a fire, they might just let it burn instead of using water to put out the fire. This facility will be surrounded by woods and residential homes. What risks will it pose by letting the fire burn to the residential properties next door?
So living in California, as I do, I am keenly sensitive to this topic. And having been a firefighter for 23 years in a career fire department, one of the key tactics is a continual situational awareness. So there is not a black and white answer for every fire and how it is addressed. And so let me give you an example of one fire that might be allowed to burn: an electric vehicle, right? No firefighter has ever had a car fire save, right? It takes so little damage to a vehicle that the insurance company owns it for the most part. So given that scenario, if it were an electric vehicle, and as long as that vehicle were not parked in a garage or next to a building, if there was not an exposure risk, then the fire department may choose to let it burn. However, with woods nearby, they would need to protect that. So that's all part of what we call exposure protection. And there was a fire at an energy storage plant in the UK several months ago, and that's exactly what the fire department did. They directed their hose streams on the neighboring containers. The container that had failed and was burning allowed it to burn and protected the exposures. So that's the best practice tactic that's taught to firefighters. And even most of them that aren't familiar with batteries, they would probably do that. This is a matter of typical tactics.
Thank you.
Great. I am jumping ahead because I'm looking at some of the questions and I see that a lot of them have either been answered already or addressed in the chat. So I'm going to jump up to a question on, with the state's aggressive goal for carbon reduction, where and when will we begin requiring smart metering? And does the Mass Firefighting Academy have current simulators and curriculum to train firefighters? And if this technology is so new and the usual lag in code adoption is to be expected, can the legislature provide encouragement to the fire services or BBRS for a more aggressive adoption schedule to keep pace with the evolving best practices? So it's a lot in that question, but I'll stop there.
I see we have Bob Fitzpatrick on the line. Bob, I don't mean to put you on the spot here, but you want to talk about the Moon Island facility and
Yeah, actually, I think
And Bob, if you would just let folks know who you are and where you're from, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Representative. Bob Fitzpatrick from the Mass Clean Energy Center. Really happy to be part of this call. I actually think my colleague Mike Condon is on this line as well. And has more direct experience with the Moon Island project. Mike, you there?
I'm here, Bob. Hey, all. Happy to take this question for everybody. So, my name is Mike Condon. I'm a program manager at the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. I worked very closely with Kavita, who used to be my former manager on the ACES projects. And who I took over the ACES program for in the Moon Island project, as well as the NFPA trainings that we did across the state. So to provide a little bit of color on what the state is doing at Mass CEC in particular, with regards to fire safety and trainings related to energy storage systems. A few years ago in 2018, 2019, we hosted 4 NFPA trainings to get firefighters and first responders more acclimated and more comfortable with understanding what needs to be done for battery energy storage systems if and when a fire does occur. That's how we were connected to Matt Paiss from PNNL, and who was the instructor and provided a lot of good training to the firefighters and first responders. With regards to how those trainings went, they were overwhelmingly positive from firefighters and first responders, and we continue to engage with a lot of fire departments, the Department of Fire Services, and a lot of other big fire departments within the state to continue these types of programs moving forward. We do anticipate doing some more of them because there is such a demand from the fire safety aspect, from firefighters and first responders asking for these types of trainings because of how great instructors like Matt were on them and how much information they provided to them to get, again, more acclimated and more comfortable with these types of technologies. With respect to Moon Island, This is a program that we developed and partnered with the city of Boston on. For those that aren't familiar with Moon Island is a little, I guess, peninsula island, I guess you could call it, right off the coast of Boston, where a lot of police and fire do their safety trainings. What we did at Moon Island specifically was install or provide funding for the city of Boston to install a larger solar PV system, a smaller solar PV system, and then a residential battery as well as a commercial size battery. So anybody that is going to train as a firefighter and first responder on these technologies within the approximate area of the city of Boston would be able to go on site and get more familiar with these types of codes and standards, the types of stickers and different types of signs and warnings that you might be able to find within a PV or an energy storage system. So this will be coming down the line. We're expecting later this year for it to come on, and we'll be working with Boston Fire, NFPA on how can we get more communities to this site to really become more trained on this type of technology. So it is something that we're going to continue doing. We know that there's a demand there for not only communities, but also firefighters and first responders. So again, that they're more comfortable with it. So yeah, it's a little bit of a long-winded response, but it's all good stuff that we're doing with respect to fire safety. And we'll continue to engage folks like Matt at PNNL and other national laboratories as well to see what they're doing.
And Bob and
And
Mike, I want to thank you for joining us on the call. I know that you probably had other things to do tonight, but I was talking to Secretary Theoharides earlier today, and I will let her know that you folks were here and extremely helpful, and I appreciate your joining us. You are tremendous resources over at Mass CEC, and you're doing a lot of great work for the Commonwealth, and we really appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Always great to spend time with you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, and
All right,
I'll
Rep.
say from just having hired Mike that on his first day or 2 days, he rushed off to Sterling to help the fire people from Boston visit that site. So he won't say no.
Excellent. Rep. Murray, you got another question?
I do, and I think this is one that we could probably have a whole forum on just individually, but I think it is important. The question is still unclear on how these batteries work exactly. They are composed of lithium in separate containers. Is there space between the battery and the walls of the container? Some of the waste products that require monitoring as potential hazards are heat energy and hydrogen gas. What other waste products are there? What are the limits for hydrogen gas and heat energy? When in operation, do these values usually fall? So really, I guess just kind of a general overall question as to, kind of the technology and the science behind these things.
Well,
I'm not going to, I can't answer it.
let me just say that, without getting too deep in a wonky sense, they are essentially a solid state electrical process that's happening. There is no moving parts in the batteries themselves. The equipment that's used to change it from DC to AC are called inverters. And that's the equipment that requires some cooling, some fans. And that's where any of the noise that's present and listed in the documents that have to be submitted for approval would be found. But again, there are no emissions. These assets run for 10, 20 years. There is maintenance in going in and checking fuses and changing air HVAC filters, but it is not. There's really no other mechanical equipment other than the HVAC. As far as the hydrogen, again, that is a byproduct during a catastrophic failure of a cell, and that the gases that come out of a cell when it's failed really depends on the chemistry of the cell itself. But again, anything that's had a catastrophic failure is going to emit incomplete products of combustion. That's what black smoke is, and it consists of dozens of carcinogens. So the term hydrogen is used because it is an early indicator of a cell failure, and there are sensors that are designed to pick that up at that early stage and isolate the failure to a smaller area. So I don't know how deep people want to go, but I put my email in there. You can email and we can talk all day about it.
Thank you.
I think there's a great question, the next one up. It says, why in that location? Wouldn't putting it in an industrial park, West Medway or the Millis border be better? There is no green energy at that particular location. So could somebody tell us why this is a good location for this type of a facility?
So maybe I'll answer this. Sorry, I feel like I'm monopolizing the mic. So if anyone else wants to answer, please go ahead. Just raise your hand or something. I'll stop talking. But from the grid integration point of view, I think that it was answered in the chat earlier that I saw scroll past. It's close to the transmission line, right? So you don't have to take high voltage lines through like residential or other like community areas to connect this system to the transmission grid. And the reason that it's there is similar to why the Medway Pica plant is there, that particular location on the transmission grid can offer some economic returns while providing the services that the grid needs in terms of capacity and potentially some ancillary services like frequency regulation and so on, right? And really, we ourselves as developers look for sites that are right next to the transmission lines or distribution lines with capacity so that we pay less in interconnection charges. And the interconnection charges have to do with communities. I mean, they're electrical in nature also, like, the materials of the conductors and whether there's three-phase there or not, but it also has to do with whether communities want these lines running through them or whether they can be co-located with relatively less impact on them.
All right, Rep. Murray, you're up.
Considering the capacity of the proposed system, any idea on how many tons of hydrocarbons won't be burned at peak demand should this come online? So I'm not sure who might have a sense as to, what that number might mean. Anybody on the panel have an idea on that?
I can try to do some back of the envelope math, but it's going to take me a few minutes. Kavita, do you know?
We can go to another question, and if you come upon something, you can add it to the chat if that's okay.
I mean, a lot of it is going to depend on how often the batteries are cycling and what they're, when and what they're displacing. But I don't know, does BlueWave give back of the envelope math? You're muted.
I'm sure we do. I'm embarrassed to say I'm not, but maybe I'll put Mike on the spot. Mike Condon, you have the conversion. At Mass EC, we used to have the conversion of the number of cars displaced or, homes powered.
One thing I'm going to suggest, and I'm going to want to do a hard stop at 9 p.m. It's 10 minutes to go. I see that there are a bunch of questions, and where we have some more work to do on this question. Believe it or not, I have the emails of everybody who's participating on this call tonight, and the questions that we don't get answered in this forum, I will endeavor to get answered and send out emails to everybody who's on this list so you can share in the information. But let's move on to The next question says, I understand these facilities are currently being deployed in New York City. I assume we have access to their engineering and fire codes. Is that correct?
I believe they are. I think Mass CC can provide them, or I can dig it up. Yes.
Great. Thank you. Rep Murray.
Let's see. I'm not sure. Some of these questions really seem more geared towards the town itself, but what expenses will the town need to incur to enhance safety protocols within our fire station? Additionally, will this increase our property liability insurance rates? What happens when the batteries need to be replaced? Where do they put them? So I'm not sure. Can address those questions.
If I may, Jeff.
Please.
So when we did the negotiations with Exelon for that facility, we developed a host community agreement. And in that host community agreement, we covered issues like equipment to, in that case, in their particular instance, be able to fight a oil-based fire. So they paid over $600,000 to buy us the equipment, and they pay us every year $25,000 to train our department to now be ready in case there's an emergency there. We also have in that agreement funds that they have to set aside so that 20 or 30 years from now, when they need to decommission that facility, right, that there are funds there to now be able to take it and clean it up so that it's not just sitting there. So now, in this particular instance, we will do the same. We will, negotiate with them to cover every one of those issues that are necessary to now make sure that there is no impact on our tax rate, that it's quite, different, that it is very much tax positive because of the significant investment. There will be a significant property tax bill coming along with it. The other thing is, in terms of liability or homeowners insurance, is this going to now, because this facility is there, is it going to cause my insurance rates to increase? Well, mine didn't when Exelon came on. And I can tell you that the town's liability and general protection insurance did not increase. And I don't believe that anybody else living anywhere near it saw an increase. So I think while these are valid concerns, they're, the answers are very positive. There is no impact.
Yeah, just to add to that, that there's typically a decommissioning plan that's required as part of the permitting process, like Selectman Trinde just indicated. And the decommissioning plan will specify what happens to, I see this question on dead batteries. Typically, and this may change as technology evolves, but like 3 or 4 years ago, they needed to be taken away to get recycled. And even when I was at Mass CC, I made an award to technology that was being developed to recycle batteries. The cobalt and manganese in a lithium-ion battery are actually very valuable. So WPI was doing some research into like crushing the battery mechanically first and then chemically separating the valuable parts like the cobalt and manganese. And then they were even prototyping, rebuilding, like, what do they call it? Like refurbishing like the parts into a new battery and evaluating how effective those are in terms of being an actual battery cycling piece. So it's similar to other like complex mechanical or electrochemical pieces. They'll be like dealt with by taking apart and taking the valuable pieces for repurposing.
Well, thank you. And I did see that I got a couple of notes offline. one regarding projects in the queue, and this is from Vincent Ragucci, who works very closely with Coleen O'Brien, and he's from Energy New England. And he said, regarding large projects in the ISO New England queue, there are two right now, the Medway project and one the same size in Westfield. The Westfield is also in a strategic location like Medway because of its close proximity to the grid transmission lines. And the one other message was whether the facility was planning to offer any community benefits. It might be worth mentioning that. I don't have that detail at this time. I know that Glenn mentioned some of it and that they will be negotiating that. To the extent that I'm able to get some information from Able Grid, I will pass that along in an email to the group. So I'll move on to the next question. Are the proposed batteries similar to the lithium ion battery in a laptop? How are they different?
So let me just say that at this stage in the project, you might have a particular manufacturer cited in a draft plan. That's not necessarily the end result. There are many different kinds of battery formats. There's a cylindrical cell, might look like a AA battery that's common in Tesla's products. You could have a pouch cell, which is common in your laptop or your cell phone, as well as stationary energy storage. And then there's also a prismatic cell format, which is kind of a rigid case. Your car battery is considered a prismatic shape. It's a rigid case shape, more rectangular. So without knowing exactly which modules are selected, it's hard to answer that question, but that's a rough answer for you.
Well, thank you. And Rep. Murray, I'm going to give you the last question of the evening for this particular discussion. And again, I will endeavor to answer each and every other question and get an email out to everyone who's participated on this call. So Rep. Murray, cue up our last question.
All right, very difficult to decide, but this one I think is significant. Please talk about Surprise, Arizona. Two questions were asked that were glossed over. Is there a reason we can't discuss this verbally in the discussion? Surprise, Arizona.
Okay, not a problem at all talking about it. There's several very public reports about it. Was a utility-owned battery that experienced a failure in one module that propagated up through the other modules in that one rack. And that system was not a UL 9540 listed system, and it did not have any explosion protection systems. It only had a clean agent system. And because it was a battery cell fire, that clean agent system is not designed for that. The fire department did a very thorough investigation, and 3 hours after they had arrived and done a lot of measurements, the utility wanted the battery back, and they wanted to make sure that there was not any additional high levels of gas inside. They cracked the door and there was an explosion a couple minutes after the door was cracked as a result of the high levels of gas inside. So there was 2 firefighters significantly injured, several others went to the hospital, and that was a real bellwether event from the safety perspective of how systems are designed. And as a result, the safety standards and the fire code have been modified to try and address those risks, as well as the training for the fire department.
Coleen, just unmute yourself.
If I could add to the chairman. I thought there was a question to talk on that, so.
You're not coming through very clear. You sound like you're in a spaceship. Try that again.
Can you hear me now?
It's still very, very high tech. You sound like you're from another planet.
Okay. I won't speak then.
If you can email me that information, and I will include that in my email to all the folks who are participating. It's now 8:59. I want to say thank you to everyone who stuck around. We still have 61 people on the chat, so that is a testimony to just how engaging our panelists have been tonight. And I want to thank you all from the bottom of my heart for taking the time out and volunteering your time to come and speak to the community about this. It is my hope that this is going to be the first of several discussions on this topic. There's a lot of energy on, no pun intended, on this topic, and would love to continue the dialogue. And I know that the Board of Selectmen would love to continue the dialogue, and I wish everybody well. And again, thank you to a phenomenal panel. I've enjoyed working with each and every one of you over the past several months, and I'm looking forward to doing that over the next several years. So thank you all. Good night, and we will make the recording available as soon as possible. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.